marriage retreat with the church. And, so Kim is kind of hesitant to make any kind of commitment like that. And Sophie's really encouraging her to consider it, to really go, that it will make a difference in their marriage. And Ivan is he's all gung-ho about this because he thinks this is the silver bullet. This is going to be the easy pass. He's just going to skate on through this bump in the road and he's going to get past it. And, everybody will be great and they'll be kumbaya. But remember, this has been a year that they've been separated. And in the course of the year, their hearts are getting hard. And they're becoming very easily offended with each other. Everything escalates, everything is tender. And at the same time, there's these little nuances and little unspoken miscommunications really that become hidden in their hearts. And so in particular, in this chapter, we find out that's exactly what happened, that Kim, had a hidden offense in her heart, where she had thought that, Ivan was having a conversation with a woman. It was kind of a miscommunication. I have to read the book to know the details, but it's a very easy to have happen, a really, easy to have happen miscommunication where she thinks something is more than it really is. So she's holding on to this offense, and this offense has hardened her heart big time. And she is done. She's got the distance problem that's really helping that hardened heart to stay hard. So here we've got these two in love, maybe they're not in passionate love, but they still love each other on some level. But they've never been challenged in their marriage. All the challenges that have come at them before have come to, parenting or his work or where they live or neighbors or friends, outside issues. Nothing, no arrow has penetrated into the marriage, and that's where they're at. And so, in one sense, it's good that they're living in the same house. They're going to church. They look on the outside like everything is status quo.
Yeah.
It's not. And so, the one really good thing is they've surrounded themselves with believers. And so, Ivan has secretly, finally, gone to his pastor and asked for advice. And that's when the pastor and his wife told him about, hey, we're having a marriage encounter. We're having this marriage retreat weekend. This would be a great opportunity. So, of course, Ivan's on that bandwagon. Okay. And they also told a few members of their family or friends, like Sophie's Kim's sister, that they are, in fact, having trouble. This hidden offense, though, is remaining hidden. And so those people are not just praying for Ivan and Kim, but they're encouraging them to speak it out. They're encouraging them to remember the love that they had. They're not tearing them apart, which I thought was really good, because that's why God created the church, because when one of us are weak, the church can encourage us and bring us back together. And so in this chapter, it's all about Ivan being gung-ho, Kim still being very guarded. This thing on the table is this marriage retreat weekend, and Ivan comes in and he's being pushy, because he sees this as a means to an end. And he's like, let's do it. Let's talk about it now. Let's have dinner on Friday. And she's like, whoa, chill out. One step at a time.
Yeah.
Like that, honestly, sounds like me. I could totally relate to this. So,
when you think about it, Joanne, men want to hurry up and get it over with, but that lady had a whole year to stew. You know what I mean? That never let anybody stew that long.
Oh no.
No, exactly. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And the heart is getting harder and harder. And so, as a matter of fact, in Mark 4, I was actually reading that yesterday about how the stones in our heart, when Jesus is talking about the parable of the soils of our heart, a hardened heart is so prone to offense. It's so prone to offense. So, okay. So this is where we're at. They're hoping that this watering, which is the name of the conference, will be a marriage checkup, a marriage, a shot that they really need. And so he's pushing it. She's pushing back. And she says, you know what? Here's the deal. I don't want to go to dinner. I want you to tell me the truth about this miscommunication. Again, I'm not going to tell you the details because I really want you to read the book. But tell me about this. Tell me about this. So he's like, oh, oh, okay. Let's have that conversation in person. She's like, no, I don't want to do it in person. I want to do it over the phone. Okay, so now they are in they're in a power struggle. Sorry. So they're in a power struggle between the two of them. And so basically she said, tell you what, we'll have the conversation, but we're going to have it over the phone. Mm-hmm. So he's like, over the phone? You know, we might live in two separate rooms of the house, but we live in the same house. Why do I have to do it over the phone? And she's like, well, that's my terms. So he says, all right, that sounds silly, but if that's how it'll happen, fine, we'll have it over the phone. So he tells Sophie, well, Sophie knows scripture. Sophie says, this is awesome. Have you been praying for your marriage? So let down your expectation and let God be God, because he knows the salve. He knows the healing that has to happen. And when you go back to the beginning of the relationship, they formed a bond of trust over the phone. Mm-hmm. She is very guarded. He is very communicative, which is kind of different in a relationship, but then usually one of the two of them is that way. You know, usually I think the woman is more chatty, but in this case, she had her safety net is intact when she's on the phone. So without her even thinking about it, she said, I'll have this conversation over the phone. Well, then Sophie says, hey, that's a revelation. What is it? A Revelation 2. Yeah. In the book, it references Revelation 2:5. So when you go and you read Revelation 2:5, it talks about, remember from where you've fallen, repent and do first works. So go back to how you fell in love. Find that love again. So here God was answering his prayer. God was answering Ivan and Kim's prayer on, how to fix this. How do we let the guard down? How do we get past the power struggle? And so, they when Ivan realized, wait a minute, hold on, God is at work here. I will let my guard down and I will have that conversation over the phone. And so now her needs feel met, that he is willing to have the conversation over the phone and not be pushy. And that's where we are. That's chapter 11.
Yeah, that to me is amazing, to do your first works over. And we think that only it's with Christ, and it is. But in this case, in a marriage, it's good advice. Because how did you fall in love? And they fell in love in a long distance relationship over the phone. They got used to hearing each other's heart that way, and God would take them back to that way. That's good stuff. That's chapter 11, Peeling the Onion. And in the journal, it says that being aware that your heart may have hidden layers of stuff within it that may cause tears. You know what I mean? We things get layered. After a year, you got a lot of layers. If you've been separated and not really communicating with a problem in your marriage, the longer you have, the more it gets embedded. And it's because also you left with all your imagination, every little thing now that he or she is doing, or you begin to examine it because you don't have communication to talk about it. You begin to make up your own scenarios about it, your own conclusions about it, because time, unanswered offense actually makes the heart, as Joanne said, grow so hard, so that was a good one. Chapter 11, Peeling the Onion. Okay, well, that's good. That leads us right over to chapter 12, the first works. And that leads us to, is that Pastor Aaliyah?
Yes, it is. When I was thinking about when Joanne was talking about chapter 11, I was thinking about when Ivan said his prayer that we discussed in our last podcast. And Ivan is like, to me, he's like, okay, I prayed, let's go. Time to work. Come on. So in reading chapter 12, Kim is starting to open up some to Ivan because she's accepting the fact he asked, could we talk? And now she's like, okay. And she went to Bible study, and Ivan is so excited.
We losing. So excited.
So excited.
Ivan is so excited that Kim is starting to open up some. And then he was like, I got to work, but I'm going to go to Bible study too. And he was so excited. You didn't know when Kim left Bible study. You didn't know I knew you left, did you? And I can imagine Kim like, no, but they were both in Bible study and they enjoyed the teaching. And then, I love Pastor Boyd, but he just had to let it out. Ivan's going to be, he just had to tell it. Can we hold something back, Pastor? Just a little something. Let me be surprised.
And she is frozen. There was a smile on her face.
So they were talking on the way home, and they were discussing Bible study and how they enjoyed the teacher who teaches theater at the college, and they was enjoying how he was describing how he was doing Bible study. And then Ivan decided to let her know, okay, I want to talk, and we're going to talk about April. That's that white elephant that's been in their marriage. Mm-hmm. That's the elephant that's been in their marriage, and they want to talk about April. But if you want to know why she's so important, as my sister Joanne said, you gotta read the book. You gotta read the book. And they were talking, and they were talking on the way home, which was good because earlier Kim didn't want to have nothing to say. Ivan, why are you talking to me? She didn't want to have nothing to do with Ivan.
Yes.
She was like, look, we here for the babies. That's it. But God had begun to soften her heart, and as they were talking and then they got home, and Kim wanted to get freshen up and get herself together so then they could talk. And as they began to talk, the ice that was on Kim's heart began to melt. And because Ivan, he talked a lot, but it didn't bother Kim because she was listening, because that's all she needed to do that time. She just needed to listen. And Ivan was just, he was finally doing something he should have did a year ago, which was communicate. Because that's if you don't have communication in your marriage with each other and God, what do you have?
You don't have anything.
Because this communication is so important. And they were, he was finally communicating, and she was finally listening. And her heart began to melt because she muted her phone and began to cry because God began to touch her heart. And Ivan was just, I'm just excited, she didn't hang up the phone on me, she's listening. And he just letting it all out, everything that they should have talked about, because in order for it to work, they had to get back to their first works.
Right.
Like, I used to hear them say, what you did to get her, you got to do to keep her.
That's what they said.
And Ivan stopped doing that. And Kim noticed that. So when I was looking at the, and Kim, she muted her phone and she just began to cry. And when you're crying, that means he's softening that heart. Because now she's becoming receptacle to Ivan, and she's listening. Not the fact that he wanted to talk about the elephant in the room, but the fact that she was willing to listen. And Ivan was so excited that she was listening. And then he did pray, and that melted Kim's heart even more. And when I was looking at it says do all things without mumbling and disputing.
Yep.
Ooh, I'm laughing because God has been
cracking herself up. Just cracking her own self up.
Yes.
It's becoming personal.
He's been teach me that. You know, I was like, all right, God. I had called Pastor Elvira. You gave me this chapter, didn't you? She was like, I just write down the. And so today I was
really
like, all right,
did.
God,
Really
you
did.
gave me this chapter.
That's great. You do us all like that. I pray
All the time. Yes, you do.
I didn't. I
Sure
randomly just went down the line. I said, well, Joanne did this time. Like this, I didn't. So God had to be the organ. I can't take credit for that.
I was like, all right, God. Today I was like, okay, you gave me this chapter, and
I thought the same thing.
you know, I was like, okay, why she give me this chapter?
Right.
And I called her
The
and I asked
hands.
her, why did you give me this chapter?
She get the hand.
Okay, why you give me this chapter?
She
I
did say that to me.
I
was
just
like,
wrote
what
it
are you talking about?
But you know, God knows what we need when
Yes,
we need it.
Yes, she does always.
So, and in reading that chapter, I was like, all right. And I was telling Pastor Elvira today, I was like, you know, I was praying and God told me to read the whole chapter of Jeremiah 29, not just 29, 11, 12 through 14, but the
Right.
whole chapter. I was like, okay.
She's cracking her old self.
Years.
All right, God, you know, and you know, whatever, like Philippians in the journal, do all things without murmuring, complaining, and that's what God was telling them when they went into captivity. You better find joy, and that's what Kim is learning how to do. And when I was looking at the question, the concern is the high cost of unforgiveness upon your marriage. Are you willing to do your first works again to capture the heart of your spouse? Yes, we have to do that. And when I was going over it, the Holy Spirit took me to Revelations 3:20.
Mm-hmm.
You know, behold, I stand at the door and knock.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what Ivan started doing.
Mm-hmm.
In the first works, that's what he was working on. Behold, I stand at the door and knock, and I will come in and sup with you. And that's what they were. That's the ice that Ivan's trying to break through by knocking on Kim's heart. He's starting to do the first works again.
You know, one of the things that we see that's spreading through this book is the way that Ivan had to learn how to be, and it's a phrase I'm your leader's servant. You know, he had to begin to learn how to be leader's servant. And actually, if you look at the book in its totality, nothing started to happen until he took that role. You know, Kim was on a plateau of, okay, I'm at the pinnacle, I'm done. You know, and he wasn't taking the leader servant role. That's what Christ is. Christ is the head of the church, but he also served the church. And I tried to write it where it was progressive for him to know he had to take these steps. Because even if you're doing your first work over, our husbands was chasing us. We was not chasing them. I mean, and so that's still on them. You know, first work is still, we was responding to their chasing, but we didn't chase. You see what I mean? They started chasing us. And we responded. So the first work is still left on the leader servant, you know, and the husband. And so as I wrote this, I wanted to show how he developed in knowing this is his role to do this. You know, early on, he wanted to throw in the towel, and his father was like, that man of God. And she said, she should expect you to be a man of God. You know, he was kind of fussy about that. She said, but she should expect that out of a man of God. You know, he had to find his role. So when we see over here in his first works, it's good that God brings him back to that. And he's eager, even if though she is kind of a little standoffish still, he still has to be the aggressor, because that's how the first works of this relationship started. And I know my prayer is that husbands come to that realization of leader servant. You know, it will, because the marriage was going to be ruined if he didn't get in that position and begin to be the one to call the pastor, be the one to get in there, be the one to take the advice, be the one to peel the onion, be the one to do the cold teas. I mean, that those steps that a leader servant has to take Because when you look how Christ does us, he's the one that, you know, is coming after us, and he's the one that's telling us, and he's the one constantly giving us scriptures and saying, I need to read the whole chapter 29. You know, he is being the leader servant, you know, and our prayer is that that message can be conveyed to husbands in that role. And then the wife, as they say, men produce and women reproduce, and we will reproduce that response. But we can't reproduce that response if we don't get the response. You know, and that's why Leah said now she's putting the phone and she's crying because he's reproducing. He's producing the godly fruit that a husband needs to produce so that this wife can recapture this again. And that work is his, you know. And as you see, even though he may have been the offender, there was something on the table for both of them to grow in. So that's the beauty of that part. So quickly, thank you for that, Pastor Leah. We're going to go on over to Rianne, and we are in chapter 13 on the same page. And she probably thought I gave that to her too. I didn't do it on purpose. I don't know.
Oh boy. Well, a couple things with this chapter, but you know, like you tell us all the time, even you know, outside of marriage with everything, you always say that God can't, like, he can't bless something, he can't prosper us if we're doing it wrong, because then we would always continue to do it wrong. We have to get things right. So even as much as Ivan can pray all he wanted to pray, but if he wasn't willing to make those changes to be the leader servant, like you said, God wasn't going to soften Kim's heart or make their, you know, marriage grow or advance in any way, because Ivan was trying to do it wrong. And if he had gotten the result he wanted from Kim while he was still doing it wrong, he would have just continued to do it wrong.
Yeah.
So thank God he's making progress. We're getting some places now. And then we get into chapter 13. I had to make little bullet points to make sure. Antoinette, you laughing at me? Then we get all the relevant parts because we're kind of closing out the book in the next couple chapters. But I mean, they're doing great. They're communicating. They've set up date night. They're having dinner. And then here's April Reed calling again. And doesn't it feel like, you know, the minute some progress is made, the minute things start to grow, now here you're being challenged with things.
Exactly.
So, you know, Kim is agreeing to go to the watering retreat. That's another like moment of celebration for Ivan because, you know, he wanted to. She had some stipulations, but she's agreed to go. They continue to talk. And then Kim gets this mysterious call. She's a doctor. She gets a call from another doctor regarding a former patient. And here's the enemy coming in yet again in this little subtle way. And the next day, you know, she's caught off guard by this phone call. The mystery person is a gentleman named Pierce Lloyd from her past, and he tells her that he's dying. So then I believe it's the next day, Kim is off and she's at home. Her daughter needs medicine for one of the babies. And she says, okay, I'll swing by the office. I'll get the fever medicine and I'll bring it over to the house. And hold on, did I step? Let me see. Nope, I missed a step. First, she's home on her day off. And while she's at home, the gentleman, Pierce Lloyd, calls her on the phone as she sees her husband, Ivan, pull into the driveway. And she's so stunned by the phone call, she actually forgets that Ivan has pulled up and is walking in the house. So she gets off the phone, you know, with Pierce right as her husband is walking in. And he just says, you know, it doesn't sound like work. Is everything okay? But she doesn't really want to talk. So, you know, now there's a little bit of maybe speculation and distrust. And so she doesn't want to talk at that time. And they agree to go to dinner later. So in the meantime, then Olivia calls and asks her to bring the fever medicine over to the house for the baby. And so when Kim gets to the office, her assistant says, you know, this gentleman dropped off these yellow roses for you. And before Kim can even think about anything, he's walking up and she says, oh, here he is. And it happens to be Pierce. And so, you know, Kim is just stunned. And he's talking because, you know, now he's confessing that, you know, he's dying and I guess he wants to make things right. And so right as Kim just goes to put her hand on his shoulder and says, you know, we need to pray, here comes Ivan walking into the office and he's yelling and angry, and they get out, they go to the car. He's bombarding her with all these questions, and why is he here? What is he? She's never seen him so angry. This Pierce has sparked this thing in Ivan. So then they get home, and there's a silence, I believe about an hour. And then Kim says, I don't like all these accusations. I don't like the way you peppered me with all these questions, and you don't trust me. So she's just like, I'm gonna go take a bath, and I'm just gonna I'm just turning it in for the night, because I don't like, how you came at me with this distrust. And so thankfully, Ivan takes time to pray, and then he's realizing, okay, let me, we have to talk. So he again, they're in the same house, but they're, texting and calling and so he asks if they can talk. And she says, okay, in about a half an hour. And then she goes to the living room and sees Ivan there with some Pellegrino and a nice little, cheese and fruit platter. And I love that even when she saw him for the first time, since he had all the accusations and questions, she didn't come with anger or resentment or with an attitude. She came and she saw that display and said, oh, a peace offering, in a delightful way that, she didn't let what had happened. And that kind of leaves us on chapter 13 on a cliffhanger, because that's all is that there's a peace offering. We don't know what's going to happen with this conversation they're going to have. But the journal, the concern is the loss of trust in your spouse. So whereas we know April had been a factor thus far in the book, here's Pierce Lloyd, and we're not seeing Ivan display this level of, I hate to use the phrase caring, but I'll say caring, because for that whole year, like you said, they lived separately, but in the same house, and you're perfectly fine with that and not taking the steps. And then flew into a rage when this man, who it's revealed in this chapter, he was, I think she used the term fatally in love with her, but this man was desperately in love with Kim, and his appearance, caused a reaction in Ivan. So even though he had done something to breach the trust, now he's having distrust in her. So now, whereas they were on their way for this reconciliation, now there's an additional thing. And I love the journal, because it brings it in to really consider things that, like Pastor Craig said, this is real life. These things are happening to couples all over, and these are real scenarios. And like she said, life doesn't stop. Marital problems don't stop just because, family situations happen and children are in distress or whatever it is. And we know nothing is by chance in that way. But you would look at the situation and think, what are the chances that she would go to pick up the medicine, that Ivan would swing by the office, and he would happen to walk in at that moment when she was just going to pray, innocently just going to pray for this man. So we know, because we have that perspective in the book, that there was nothing nefarious or anything, in that way as far as her interaction with Pierce. But when he came in, he jumped to a conclusion. So, in the journal, we're discussing the concern being when we offend our spouse, and it's not always easy to undo that hurt and pain that's caused. And sometimes just, I'm sorry, is not enough to cut it. So the question is, are you willing to do more to promote restoration back into the relationship? And it seems like, Ivan was already on his way there, and this meeting with Pierce probably put even more fire under that, that promotion to to take the steps and to do the things to get the marriage back on track. But that's a difficult scenario, because like you said, it's different when trust is breached, because now, you're looking at situations differently from what you would have before. So, maybe Ivan's own guilt made him so angry when he just saw them, because it doesn't appear that Kim had done anything thus far to make him distrust her, or, anything to give him cause to believe that she had breached his trust in any way. So that is a healing process that they'll have to go through to promote that restoration and to heal from that pain that was caused. And obviously it was still a wound for, Ivan to have responded the way he did.
Right. when you say these are all real scenarios, they actually are.
Yeah.
I had to write that one. I had to write that one because that actually happened to that degree. You know, and sometimes even though the enemy, when you start to get on the road of success, the enemy starts bringing these factors in. We know there's no accidents or happenstance, but sometimes God uses those factors in this way, whereas maybe now he could feel how she felt, and
Exactly.
look how it was so unacceptable. And that actually was an actual thing that happened in one of our sessions, and so I had to write it in there in that way because we was just astounded that the other person responded so vehemently, and it was innocent. And here you're guilty.
Right.
Right.
But sometimes the Lord say, now see how that feels?
Mhm.
What does that feel like? So God can use all things in that, but it's full of if you guys don't know, if you're just tuning in, it's Journey to the Watering. We just finished chapter 13. We'll pick it up again and finish the last 2 chapters, but this is an awesome book to get. Again, go to Amazon.com. You can get it and get your copy, an ebook as well as paperback book, And Kim and Ivan is on this journey. The conference is called The Watering, and their marriage is in trouble, but Ivan has decided to be leader servant, take upon the role to save his marriage. And we have been discussing this. So you can go to our previous tapes and see those chapters 1 all the way up to where we are now. And I'm just so excited to have sharing this time with my wonderful sisters here. They bring such a great perspective as we go through, given the fact that all of us here are all married. So again, I'm married 29 years. Joanne, drum roll. How many years?
40 years. 40 years.
And she looks gorgeous. Pastor Ian, just this Sunday, drum roll, just hit what, Pastor Ian?
20 years.
and Antoinette, how many years? Drum roll.
23 years.
And Aaliyah is the baby of us all. Drum roll, Aaliyah.
10.
Arlie is the bad little sister of the group.
10 years.
And as these ladies, the reason why they can explain this book so easily in reading it is because they have walked through many things in their lives, and we have to trust God for those things. And that's the beauty of it all. He doesn't remove them, but he trusts us to walk through them, and we always come out better and stronger, And so thank you, ladies, for joining us for a new view. Listen, thank you again. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share. Be back again as we finish off this book. Listen, bless you all, and bye-bye.